examine exactly how the Taliban might govern the country. Shanthie Mariet D'Souza is the founding professor of the Kautilya School of Public Policy. It's in Hyderabad, India. She spent over a decade working on the ground across Afghanistan. Shanthie, thank you so much indeed for your time. As Bilal said there, it's only a few days since Sunday when the Taliban fighters walked into the presidential palace, and basically then 24 hours later, the Taliban announcing that the war is over. What does the group have to do to begin to put together the infrastructure for the government that it wants? We can talk about what sort of government that might be later, but what are the very basics it needs to get right?
Well, I think the military victory was pretty fast for the Taliban, so they actually want a governance structure in place. So I think they will actually utilize what is already existing, and that is just in a way to get support from the local population and also have to, in a way, have some governance in place. So we are looking at a situation where what is seen could be pretty misleading. But in terms of governance, I think the Taliban will use what is existing and later build on what it really wants to do in terms of bringing in change.
And in terms of the kind of people that were fearing reprisals, you think of the people, they were educated, right? The ones who helped the Americans, not just the translators, the administrators as well. And then there's this call for civil servants to return to work. I mean, how is the Taliban going to manage these people when we look outside into Afghanistan, believe that most Afghans don't want the Taliban in power?
Yeah, that was the reality. But the fact is also the Afghans were caught between the devil and deep blue sea, given the levels of violence and the war fatigue which was developing, and the fact that the American commitment towards Afghanistan was floundering. There was this concern that the Taliban would come back someday. So in a way, they were prepared for it. Interestingly, in one of the interviews I'd done in 2011 with Maulvi Kalamuddin, who was the deputy vice chief of the Taliban and who had surrendered, he was quite open to having modern education and women working in offices and all of that. But having said that, we cannot say for sure that there has been a transformational change in the Taliban mindset or on their ideology towards how they're going to rule Afghanistan. So we are looking at a situation where we have Western educated people in Afghanistan who still want to stay, but they fear that the Taliban will change their ways. So given the fact that the Taliban now wants international legitimacy and acceptability, and also acceptability within Afghanistan, because they don't want a state collapse there. So they are working with what they have, and gradually I think they will change their ways.
Shanthie, you've worked in Afghanistan, you've worked with the Taliban, spoken to them, but also normal people. When you hear Joe Biden, the American president, saying that the Afghans don't want to fight this war for themselves, and other people saying that the Afghans have basically not shown any desire to counter militarily the Taliban, how much does that show that the West has misunderstood Afghanistan on a very basic level?
It has totally misunderstood Afghanistan, and also the fact that it has misunderstood the basic rules of international intervention. So when the US military went in 2001, it went for a limited quick war. The focus was more on Iraq rather than Afghanistan. So it was a limited counterterrorism operation where they didn't have any idea or a vision of an end state in Afghanistan, where Afghans would be in charge of their own affairs. Thereby, you did have the Americans training the Afghan army, but it was more in terms of a conventional lines, not really to fight insurgency or an asymmetrical warfare, which Afghanistan is witnessing now. So we are looking at a situation where you see Americans had invested a lot of blood and treasure, but all of that has gone in vain. It's not because the Afghans didn't want to fight, they were not equipped to fight the right war. And as you see, the ANDSF had collapsed and collapsed pretty fast. They were looking for reinforcement, they were looking for support, and they were looking for help, and they got it from nobody, not from Americans and not from their own leadership. So you really can't blame the Afghans and the Afghan army for what happened. But the only fact of the matter is that if there was a leadership in place in Afghanistan and a vision in the United States that we are going to leave in this period of time, but in this period of time, we'll make Afghanistan capable to deal with its own affairs, we wouldn't be seeing Afghanistan the way it is today.
Just finally, briefly, if you don't mind, Shanthie, I mean, give us the perspective that you think is going to be coming from the Indian government in terms of its engagement with the Taliban government. Originally, 1996 to 2001, when the Taliban was in charge, India did not recognize the legitimacy of that Taliban government. But India since has become a world leader in investment in civilian infrastructure in Afghanistan. Might that make a difference?
Yes, it would. I think the situation in the 1990s and today is very different. For one, there was not forceful capture of power of the Taliban. But having said that, India did not actually have any channels of communications with the Taliban. In all the peace processes and peace deals which were signed by most of the countries, India had stayed out. It actually had its own independent policy of supporting an Afghan-led, Afghan-owned, and Afghan-controlled processes. But again, having said that, India didn't do much to build on the Afghan government's capabilities. And thereby we see what happened to the Afghan government when things fell flat in Afghanistan. So we are at a situation where India has invested tremendously in Afghanistan, and it has pledged more than $3 billion US, has a lot of goodwill inside Afghanistan, and is caught between the devil and deep blue sea of whether to stay in Afghanistan or to leave Afghanistan. And both of these are stark choices. I would think if I was a diplomat, it would have been easy to engage in some level to see if India could continue its presence, not because it wants to engage the Taliban, but it cannot abandon Afghanistan once again the way it did in the 1990s. And that would not really reflect well for a global leader or a regional power with global aspirations. And more importantly, given the fact that India has a seat now in the UN Security Council. So I think India's policy has to be more proactive and pragmatic to deal with the realities of the ground rather than having a principled approach of not dealing with the Taliban. The
Shanthie,
reality is that, yes.
I'm really sorry. Thank you so much. I was just going to say how interesting it is to hear your analysis, and then I cut you off. But still, extremely interesting, of course. Shanthie Mariet D'Souza, thank you so much.